Thank you all for having me. Let me just pull up my presentation. And you can all see that. I will assume that that's a good to go. Um, all right, so just as a brief introduction to myself, I got a BFA from RISD in textiles design back in 2016. And my work in the textiles department was always focused on materiality and structure, specifically in knitted and woven constructions. So as far as my career trajectory, this carried me through this sort of thought process and interest in structure and material carried me through several years in industry. And so I worked as a textiles designer and materials engineer for 4 to 5 years before considering applying for the grant. And the reason why Fulbright for me seemed like a great option to move forward was because I was really looking for a change that would shift me more towards creative practice and academic research. And so to talk a little bit about my Fulbright application process, I want to start with a little analogy that I actually heard here while I was in Taiwan. And this is sort of to indicate that there are a lot of different ways to approach how to develop a compelling grant. And the analogy here is bricklayers versus gold miners as a metaphor for different ways of approaching research, where a bricklayer might be someone who has a framework premeditated for how to construct a project. And what they do is they find the bricks and lay them on top of each other to build the foundation. And so that might look like something where for your Fulbright proposal, I know specifically I want to study puppetry in Paris. A miner, on the other hand, starts with sort of a block of earth and mines away, revealing gold underneath. And I feel like my research process was a little bit more of this mining, excavating approach, a process of discovery, where the idea itself was sort of being revealed as I was beginning to survey the landscape. And so you'll get a sense of that in the next few slides as well. So the starting point for this project for me was that I had actually gone to Taiwan once before back in 2019. And this trip illuminated the presence of art, design, craft in Taiwan. These are just some images from that trip, some photos of landmarks, food, architecture, and art spaces. And I think that once I had gone on this trip, I sort of was inspired in thinking, oh, I want to go back there. And simultaneously, I had learned Mandarin Chinese through exposure from my parents, who are both from mainland China. And this was sort of coupled with the desire to go somewhere where I could personally improve my language abilities. And that being said, the language ability, my background in Chinese also has helped me immensely while I was here. And so it helped with the application process and has helped through the whole grant period. And so once I knew that I was going to end up in Taiwan, I wanted to apply for a Taiwan Fulbright. I began doing research on Taiwanese crafts specifically, looking at the textile space, looking at what universities, research institutions were doing work in Taiwanese textiles. And I stumbled across this institution, the National Taiwan Craft Research and Development Institute. I saw that among all of the craft disciplines that they specialize in, which include bamboo, lacquer, stone, woodworking, ceramics, they also had a fiber craft studio, and I was thinking, that's for me. So I delved more into what they specialize in on the textile side. And among the list of things that they specialize in, knot making and natural dyes piqued my interest. Part of the reason for that is because the RISD textile program and my experience in industry focused heavily on weaving and knitting, but knot making and natural dye processes are at that point were still very, very new to me. I didn't know much about them at all. And I felt like these two processes also captured specific aspects of Taiwanese craft culture and also provided more of an entry point in terms of engaging with how the craft ties to the history, geography, and culture of Taiwan. And then so as far as process, the application process was pretty straightforward as far as developing the affiliate relationship. I just reached out to them through their contact us page, and then through a series of emails was connected to the right point of contact in their technical division. And then I began an email correspondence. One thing to note is that a really important part of developing my affiliate relationship was through communicating through visual means, because there was a language barrier in terms of engaging. We were talking mostly in English, but I was mostly making these like inspiration decks, creating visual references so that they could really get a sense of what I was interested in doing. So you can see here, this is one of the decks. This was sort of beginning to develop the sort of visual language, the formal structural material qualities that I was interested in exploring. And then lastly, sort of like what the final outcome might look like. The idea being that there might be like an installation where I'd be hanging textiles and sculptures in space. And then once I was communicating with them through these slides, they were able to give me really concrete feedback as well. And so these are just quotes from our email correspondence, but things like feedback on, oh, like what would be specific project execution goals and outcomes. And so this led me to creating like more explicit learning goals, more explicit definitions around what the installation might look like. Things like facilitating communication. So they were corresponding with me on like, oh, is it better to communicate via email? We can also set up video conferences. Let us know what works best for you. And then lastly, they were really supportive because they expressed general excitement and positivity towards the potential relationship formed throughout the grant period and beyond. So the host was really like a very supportive point of contact throughout the whole application period. And then another thing to note too was that I actually applied twice to the grant. And the first time I applied, I was selected as an alternate or waitlisted. So I applied again, and during that whole period, which was a pretty long period, having applied twice, the host was just really, really supportive and encouraging. So then coming to my actual project in Taiwan, my project was called Tying the Friendship Knot because it's a project about knot tying. And to speak a little bit about, again, that approach to materiality and structure, this is some work that I was doing prior to the grant. And so like these are some textiles that I developed. From a material standpoint. There are these materials that have luster and sheen. And then from a structural standpoint, this is a plain weave textile. It's inherently three-dimensional in structure, but because it's three-dimensional, it enables this sort of like iridescent effect where as you change the angle of view, the color also shifts in the textile. So the images on the top are the same textile, just photographed from two different angles. And so I was like really interested in this sort of like interaction with light, this interaction with structure and material. And so that was a lot of the sort of same thinking that I was beginning to apply towards my project in Taiwan. And so these were some of the first experiments that I was working with. These were some knots that I was making. And at this point, I was just using any material that I could find. I was beginning to sort of learn more about traditional materials in the craft space, such as rami, jute, bamboo. But I was also just going to the hardware store, and this is something that I found at the hardware store. And then simultaneously, I was also taking photos like all throughout my experience, just walking around. And I became interested in this idea of a net, both as a textile construction, but also as a metaphor for something that both contains and entraps, as well as functions as a medium of porosity, allowing light, air, and water to pass through. And so a lot of the images that I was capturing sort of either address the formal or metaphorical aspects of that. And that shifted the direction of my project a bit. It broadened the scope to include not just knot tying, but also weaving. And I felt like weaving was also a way in which I could use my background and expertise to help support my affiliate, because a lot of the time that I spent on the loom, I was also able to do demos on how does weaving work, how do these structures get made for classes and workshops that were happening concurrently with my project. And then a lot of the things in my initial proposal still held. So while I was focusing on like weaving, interlacing, knotting, I was also looking at the sort of like natural dyes, looking at the relationship between the stuff of the material and their like natural origins. So looking at sort of the ways in which indigo plant species grow in Taiwan and how that pertains to the color that is produced in the fibers. And then simultaneously also exploring different types of novel materials. So these sort of like plastic boards were ones that I also felt like were very unique to Taiwan. They really had this like sense of ubiquity in the Taiwanese landscape, the visual landscape. And so you see this all throughout the city, even in the countryside, you see this plastic material. And so this idea of like materiality combined with structure was something that was like always sort of a recurring theme in my work. And then even throughout the grant period, I was communicating through visual references. So I was doing a lot of diagramming and drawing just to communicate my intention, my exhibition goals. And then I recently installed this exhibition, and this was actually installed just last week. So I was pretty busy just doing lighting and doing all this hanging hardware. But I think that in communicating with the affiliate on my goals throughout the process, they were able to sort of like have confidence that I was able to execute on this. And then right now it's March 1st. So something about my application was that it was also divided into two parts. The first was primarily focused on this exhibition, and the second, which is sort of the next 3 to 4 months, were left more open-ended in my proposal. So that's something that I actually felt was interesting in my application process too, this idea of like, is it okay to leave something more open-ended? But that sort of time, like what the next sort of coming months will look like for me, was actually something that my affiliate really helped me make more concrete, because they were also beginning to connect me with other universities and companies to develop new projects. And so that's something that I'm beginning to do research and development on now. And so in the last few minutes, I want to just talk briefly about my life in Taiwan. I really appreciate sort of the community engagement that my affiliate has. They function as a craft research institute, but they are also really invested in bringing Taiwanese craft to the youth. And so these are some activities that they have ongoing throughout my time there, but also this is part of the programming that they try to arrange every year. This is the workspace that I have. This is the weaving room, and there are many different types of looms that I had access to. And then lastly, I've been able to travel a bit. I've been able to explore sort of the beautiful landscapes that exist in Taiwan. And so that's been really, really wonderful. And that's all I have.